Today we're going to be talking about 10 nutrients that every diabetic and every person with blood sugar problems needs to understand, possibly even supplement with to maintain healthy, solid blood sugar control. So let's dive in. So I think it's important to understand first and foremost, the pathway of blood sugar itself. If you kind of have a better understanding of that, you'll understand where these nutrients fit in, and then we can talk about how you can get these nutrients. In step one here, you can see food, right? Food comes through, obviously it's what you eat. So food being a major factor in your blood sugar levels. So, right, it's the quality of that food. Are you eating processed sugar? Are you eating foods that are simple sugars and overabundance, right? So this food quality and quantity as well can play a major role. So I get this a lot. Some people eat whole natural foods, but in the summertime they may eat the whole watermelon, right? And that is a bad idea. You want to have some, but don't have the whole thing. Excessive amounts of fruit, even though they're real whole foods, can drive up your blood sugar as well, and you got to keep that. Kind of at the top of your mind. One of the other things, though, that aside from food, so there's definitely food, but what else will drive up your blood sugar? It's stress. Stress causes the release of the stress hormones, the catabolic hormones that ask your liver to dump sugar into your bloodstream. So you get the stress hormones allowing the sugar to go to your bloodstream from the liver directly. And then another big one, at least in industrialized countries, is excessive caffeine. So how many people do energy drinks, excessive amounts of coffee. I'm not talking about the 1 cup a day type person. I'm talking the person that drinks a pot a day. Remember, caffeine also activates the stress response and can increase the glucose that hits your bloodstream. So think of it as food being kind of step one, food and what you put in your body or what you expose your body to here as in a way of stress. But once that glucose hits your bloodstream, we get this signaling effect to the pancreas. And on the surface of your pancreas, you have all these vitamin D receptors, right? And that vitamin D activates those vitamin D receptors. And we'll call this step 2. Okay, step 1 is what you eat. Step 2 is once that sugar hits the bloodstream, it signals the pancreas through vitamin D. And then we get over here, we get step 3, which is if you have adequate magnesium and you have adequate zinc, then your body can produce insulin, right? So that's what we're seeing here. And if you have adequate insulin, then that insulin docks to the insulin receptor, which is right here, okay? That insulin receptor is like a key, or rather a keyhole. The insulin is like the key. If you want to think of it that way, the insulin receptor, which again, that's the receptor, is like a keyhole, and it's made out of chromium and vitamin B3, right? So if you're low or deficient in chromium or vitamin B3, that receptor will be basically less functional, right? It will become, there's a term in medicine that's used commonly, it's insulin resistance, right? When that receptor, when you don't have adequate chromium or vitamin B3, that receptor doesn't work as well, then the insulin doesn't work as well, and you become resistant to the insulin that you produce. But even beyond that, right? Once we get beyond step, again, we call that, up here, we call that step 3. And then we get here, which we'll call step 4. And so that's what's called secondary messaging. It's where calcium and inositol help to pick up the message from the receptor and deliver that message to this structure right here. Scientifically, this is called a GLUT door. We could also call it a glucose door, but it's where this door opens and it allows the glucose to come out of your blood into the cell, right? And then it traverses into your cell, and it goes through a number of different biochemical processes to be broken down. There's a couple of different processes that occur, and these processes require, to a large extent, B vitamins and CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, but you could also, copper is also required, and iron is also required in that process, although the focus here is on B vitamins and CoQ10. So if you can break down that glucose once it enters the cell, using vitamins and CoQ10, then you can get to that last step, which is energy production, energy or ATP, right? So again, step 1, we have the quality and the quantity of the food. Step 2, we have the vitamin D reception being messaged and creating insulin in step 3, and then insulin docks to the insulin receptor in step 4. We have the secondary messenger aspect or function, which allows glucose to come into the cell, and that would be what we call step 5. And then the last step, which is the generation of energy through the metabolic breakdown of that glucose. So again, as a review, I know I maybe threw a little bit too much chemistry at you, maybe not, but the important thing to review here is that you need nutrients for this to happen. And so if we're talking about those nutrients, you know, what really are we referring to? We're referring to vitamin D, zinc, magnesium. We're referring to chromium, vitamin B3 specifically, and then calcium, inositol, which is like a B vitamin, and then we're referring to as well CoQ10. And then you also have the whole group of B vitamins altogether. So these are the 10 that you metabolically, you absolutely have to have them in place in order to regulate blood sugar. Now, I want to pose this question to you. How many of you have been to the doctor, been told you have diabetes, and then been put on a medication, right? And maybe told to change your diet and exercise, but usually the conversation, at least in my experience, it goes like this. You need to eat right, you need to exercise, and here's some metformin. And that, I would imagine most of you watching this have had that similar type of experience. But how many of your doctors actually sat down with you, had this conversation, or put in a lab order to measure this list, right? How many of you could say that your doctor put in a lab order to measure that list? My guess would be less than 1% of you watching this have actually had that happen. Most doctors, you got to remember, they don't train in nutrition. They don't understand it. It's very sad. It's unfortunate. But the average medical doctor has less than 7 hours of nutritional training when they go through school. And so this information is typically above and beyond their knowledge base. So now that you have the knowledge, you can take this information in and you can have a decent conversation, hopefully, with a doctor. If your doctor cares and cares about you and wants to understand how to help you better, they can do that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the role of nutrition beyond what we just talked about, just kind of emphasizing some research here. So what you can see from this research study, I'm showing you the graphic, but I want to kind of highlight, there's 2 sections of this diagram I want to highlight. And this is, again, for the prevention, the role of nutrition in the prevention of diabetes and blood sugar problems. But you see vitamin here, I've got it circled, and you can see the functions, glucose utilization, which is part of what I just showed you, as well as insulin signaling and insulin release. Those are the things that I just showed you. But then there's a 4th element here, and that's that these same vitamins help to control the production of inflammatory chemicals that can drive blood sugar even higher. Remember, inflammation leads to aggressive production of cortisol. Cortisol elevations over time increase blood sugar. So we want to do our best to try to control inflammation, and nutrients, vitamins specifically, help to do that. We also have over here mineral substances, again, super important. They help with glucose transport, and they help with what are called redox reactions. If you've ever heard the term antioxidant, that's what this is referring to. We commonly, as part of our natural body process, we have a kind of damage that occurs on a day-to-day basis. The maintenance or the housekeeping of our biochemistry leads to the production of compounds called free radicals. And these free radicals can increase blood sugar, they can increase insulin resistance if they're there aggressively, again, and that's where minerals can play a role, because many of our minerals are very potent antioxidants that are going to help to basically to control the aggressive nature of these free radicals forming, especially as a result of getting too much carbohydrate and glucose in the diet. Now let's go to this other research study that I want to show you. This is kind of just a review the role of minerals and trace elements in diabetes and insulin resistance. This was published in the journal Nutrients here recently. And so you can see here just kind of in summary, altered levels or low levels. And in this research review, they were reviewing nutrients like zinc and cobalt and chromium, selenium, calcium, boron, iodine, magnesium, and iron. All of these nutrients playing a major role, again, in protecting you from the oxidative stress, because the oxidative stress in and of itself will drive blood sugar, will drive insulin resistance, and drive diabetes. So it's important, again, they walk away, the key today is to understand that you can't ignore nutrition if you're talking about diabetes. And again, in medicine today, and even in dietetics, where you go to a dietitian or a so-called or claimed nutritional expert, and what do they tell you? Generally, they tell you to eat a complete and balanced diet that's rich in whole grains. And one of the problems with that is whole grains are very poor in nutrient density, so they don't have a lot of these nutrients. And most processed foods that have labels that claim to contain whole grains are extremely dangerous in terms of nutritional value. So you're going to get a lot of calories for very, very little nutrients. And remember, for every calorie you eat, that calorie requires vitamins and minerals in order for you to be able to break it down. Remember, glucose, every molecule of glucose equates to about, every gram of carbohydrate equates to about 4 calories, and you need vitamins and minerals to break that carbohydrate down. That's what I was showing you earlier. So if you're eating foods that are nutrient dense, that's great, but if you're eating foods that are not nutrient dense, grain falling into that category, then you're going to end up making your diabetes and blood sugar worse. So you definitely want to avoid that type of guidance and advice. Eating a whole grain based diet is not necessarily going to help this problem. There's a lot of research now showing, and it's been my experience clinically, that people that do that end up with higher blood sugar, not lower blood sugar. Okay.